It was a bright Tuesday morning when Angela Williams, a successful black entrepreneur, walked into the elegant downtown bank. Her confident stride and professional outfit made it clear she was someone important. Angela had recently sold a major share of her tech company and was now looking to make a larger investment. She had done her research on the bank and knew it was one of the top financial institutions in the city. She approached the counter and was greeted by the bank manager, Harold Thompson, who looked her up and down with a raised eyebrow. He was a middle-aged man, tall and well-dressed, with a stiff, professional air about him. But there was something about the way he looked at Angela, something dismissive, as if she didn't belong in such a prestigious place. Angela smiled politely and introduced herself, but Harold barely made eye contact as he asked, "How can I help you today?" Angela calmly explained that she wanted to open a business account for her company and discuss some investment opportunities. Her business was doing well, and she was looking to expand it. She even mentioned that she had a substantial amount of money she was looking to invest. Harold's expression didn't change. He nodded, but his response was cool and unwelcoming. "Well, we can discuss your account options, but I'm not sure if you meet our criteria for a business investment," he said curtly, tapping away at his computer. Angela was taken aback. She was well aware of her financial standing, having built her tech company from the ground up. She had a solid reputation in the business world. Yet here she was, feeling as though she had to prove herself, despite all her achievements. Before Angela could ask for more details, Harold added, "I think it's best if you speak with one of our financial advisors. They'll be able to guide you through our procedures." His tone made it clear that he was already dismissing her request without truly considering it. Angela felt a sting of disappointment. She had dealt with her fair share of challenges as a black woman in the business world. But this felt different. This wasn't just a missed opportunity. This was personal. She had always been careful to avoid making assumptions about people, but something about Harold's behavior told her that he was judging her based on her appearance, perhaps even her race. Angela kept her composure. "I would appreciate it if I could speak with someone else," she said calmly, refusing to let her frustration show. But Harold, almost dismissively, waved toward a nearby desk. "I'll have someone come over soon," he said with a shrug. With a polite nod, Angela turned to leave, but not before she made one last attempt. "Thank you for your time, but I believe I will take my business elsewhere." Harold barely acknowledged her as she left, absorbed in his paperwork. As Angela stepped out of the bank and into the sunlight, she felt a mix of disbelief and frustration. She knew she had just been turned away for reasons that had nothing to do with her qualifications or financial standing. The pain of the experience lingered, but she refused to let it defeat her. This was just another obstacle to overcome. She would find another way, and she would make sure people knew what had happened here. Angela walked away from the bank, her thoughts racing. She had been treated unfairly, but she couldn't let it stop her. As she made her way down the busy street, she tried to shake off the frustration that was beginning to build inside her. She knew she had to stay calm and collected. Angela had worked hard to build her company and her wealth, and she wasn't about to let one man's narrow-minded attitude ruin everything. Once she was back at her office, Angela sat down at her desk and took a deep breath. She needed to figure out what to do next. She could feel her anger rising, but she knew the best way to respond was with action, not with more anger. Angela had been in the business world long enough to know that people like Harold Thompson didn't just act alone. His attitude wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a much larger problem in the banking world and beyond. She started making some calls. Angela reached out to a few of her trusted business contacts, telling them about the experience at the bank. She wasn't sure what she hoped to gain at first, maybe some advice, or maybe just a vent. But as she spoke with more people, she realized that the problem she had faced wasn't unique. Several of her contacts, who were also successful black entrepreneurs, had similar stories of being treated unfairly by banks and financial institutions. That's when Angela had an idea. She knew that she couldn't let this situation slide. If Harold Thompson was going to treat her this way, She had to make sure that no one else was treated the same. She decided to start digging. Angela spent the next few hours looking into the bank's history. She researched online reviews, looked at customer complaints, and even reached out to some journalists she knew to see if they had heard of any similar cases. It didn't take long before she uncovered troubling patterns. There were multiple stories of Black clients and minority business owners being unfairly denied services or given much higher rates than white clients with similar financial profiles. Angela's anger grew, but so did her determination. She realized that what had happened to her was part of something much bigger, and she wasn't going to be silent about it. Angela wasn't someone who backed down from challenges. She was used to fighting for what she believed in, especially when it came to her business. But this felt different. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for others who had faced the same kind of discrimination. And now, it was time to do something about it. She picked up the phone again, this time calling a well-known civil rights attorney who had handled cases of racial discrimination in business. Angela explained her story, and the lawyer was immediately interested. "This is exactly the kind of case that needs to be heard," he told her. Angela could feel the fire inside her building again. But it wasn't just anger anymore. It was a sense of purpose. Before hanging up, the lawyer told her to gather all the information she could about the bank's practices. "We're going to make sure people know what happened here," he said. Angela felt a sense of relief. She wasn't alone in this fight. There were people who cared, and together, they would make sure that this bank, and others like it, were held accountable. Angela wasted no time after her conversation with the lawyer. She knew that if she wanted to make a real impact, she needed to gather as much evidence as possible. She spent the next few days digging deep into the bank's history and its policies. She pored over customer reviews, read complaints on forums, and looked for any signs that the bank might have a pattern of discriminating against Black clients or minority business owners. What she found only confirmed her suspicions. The more Angela looked, the more troubling stories she uncovered. Clients had written about being turned away without explanation, while others were given higher fees or worse treatment simply because of their race. It wasn't just one branch. There were multiple reports from different locations. Angela knew that Harold Thompson wasn't an isolated case. This was bigger than one bad manager. This was about an entire system of discrimination. The bank's treatment of her had been unacceptable, but it wasn't just about her anymore. Angela realized that the only way to truly make a difference was to expose this behavior to the public. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the people who had been unfairly treated by this bank, and by others like it. But Angela also knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. Help from people who had more power, more influence, and more reach. So Angela started reaching out to her network of influential friends and business contacts. She called a few well-known civil rights activists, some who were advocates for minority entrepreneurs, and some who had the media connections she needed to get the word out. She shared her experience with them, along with the research she had gathered. Everyone she spoke to was shocked, but they were also deeply interested in helping her bring attention to the issue. One of her contacts, a prominent journalist who had written about inequality in the financial world before, agreed to write an article about her experience. Angela knew that once the story was out there, it would create a firestorm. The public would have to listen. As the journalist worked on the article, Angela made sure to gather testimonials from other business owners who had been mistreated by the bank. She contacted people who had been denied loans, had their accounts closed without explanation, or had been offered worse terms than white customers. The more people Angela spoke to, the more it became clear that this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was part of a larger problem. The day the article was published, Angela felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She knew that the story would go viral, but she had no idea just how fast the reaction would be. Almost immediately, people began sharing the article on social media. Some of her friends and supporters posted about their own experiences with discrimination, while others called for a boycott of the bank. The hashtag boycott the bank quickly gained traction, and soon the story was being covered by news outlets across the city. Angela watched in awe as her story spread like wildfire. But even as the media buzzed, she knew this was just the beginning. She had sparked a movement, and she wasn't going to stop until she saw a real change. The bank might have thought it could get away with its behavior, but Angela was about to make sure that it would face the consequences of its actions. The moment the article hit the news, the floodgates opened. Angela's story was everywhere, on social media, in newspapers, and on television. People were shocked by how a successful black entrepreneur like Angela could be treated so unfairly in a prestigious bank. It didn't take long for the story to go viral, and the bank quickly found itself at the center of a public relations disaster. Angela could barely keep up with the attention. Her phone rang nonstop, with reporters asking for interviews, business leaders offering support, and even strangers expressing their anger at the bank's treatment of her. Many of her followers on social media were outraged, sharing their own stories of being mistreated by banks and other institutions. It was clear that Angela's experience wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a much bigger problem, one that people were finally starting to pay attention to. While the attention felt overwhelming at times, Angela knew this was her moment. She had worked hard for years to build her business and her reputation, but this wasn't about her anymore. This was about bringing light to an issue that had affected so many people, particularly black and minority business owners who often faced discrimination in the financial world. She felt a sense of responsibility to make sure this wasn't swept under the rug. The bank, on the other hand, was scrambling to contain the damage. They issued a public apology, but it felt hollow and insincere to many. In their statement, they promised to investigate the incident and take corrective action. But Angela knew it wasn't enough. She'd heard too many similar stories of banks making empty promises in the past. She wasn't going to let them get away with just an apology. What shocked many, however, was that the bank didn't immediately fire Harold Thompson, the manager who had turned her away. Instead, he was temporarily suspended, and the bank claimed that they were looking into the matter. Angela was furious. This was not a mistake. It was blatant discrimination. If the bank truly cared about fixing the problem, they would have taken immediate action. But instead, they seemed to be playing the waiting game, hoping that the media storm would die down on its own. The public was having none of it. People began calling for a complete boycott of the bank. Business owners, particularly from minority communities, announced that they would withdraw their assets unless the bank took real action. Social media exploded with posts urging people to take their business elsewhere, and the hashtag boycott the bank continued to trend. Angela saw an opportunity. She didn't just want to be a voice of anger. She wanted to use this moment to push for real change. She began to speak out more about what needed to happen next. She started pushing for stronger policies on diversity and inclusion, not just in banking, but across the financial industry. She met with lawmakers and business leaders to discuss ways to ensure that minority business owners were treated fairly. But Angela also had a personal mission. She wanted the bank to take responsibility for what had happened to her, and to many others. She wasn't about to let them sweep this under the rug, not when so many had suffered in silence for years. Angela knew that she had the power to make a difference, and now, more than ever, she was determined to use it. As the pressure continued to build, the bank finally responded with a public apology. They issued a carefully crafted statement, expressing regret over the incident and promising to investigate the actions of Harold Thompson. The apology seemed like the right thing to do, but to Angela, it felt hollow and rehearsed. It was clear they were trying to minimize the damage, hoping that a few carefully chosen words would calm the growing storm. But Angela wasn't fooled. She knew the apology wasn't enough. The bank had not only failed her, but had also failed to recognize the systemic issues at play. Their response was not an attempt to change. It was a way to save face and avoid further damage to their reputation. The more Angela thought about it, the angrier she became. This wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about a larger pattern of discrimination that had been allowed to continue unchecked for far too long. What made matters worse was the fact that Harold Thompson, the manager who had turned her away, was not immediately fired. Instead, the bank said they were looking into the matter. For many people, this was a clear sign that the bank wasn't serious about making real changes. If they were, they would have taken immediate action. But instead, they allowed a man who had shown such blatant disregard for their clients to remain employed, even temporarily. Angela's frustration grew. She couldn't let the bank get away with simply offering an apology and brushing the whole thing aside. She knew that they had a history of mistreating black clients and minority business owners. She had heard the stories from other entrepreneurs, but now it was time for those stories to be heard. The more Angela learned, the more convinced she became that the bank had been engaging in a pattern of racial discrimination for years. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much bigger problem. Her network of contacts continued to grow, and so did the support for her cause. More and more people were speaking out, sharing their own experiences with the bank. Some of them had been turned away for loans, others had been charged higher fees, and many had been treated dismissively simply because of the color of their skin. It was a painful reminder of the inequality that still existed in so many parts of society, but it also gave Angela the strength she needed to keep pushing forward. In the midst of this public outcry, the bank announced that they were reviewing their internal policies and that they planned to implement diversity training for all their staff. But Angela wasn't satisfied. She knew that diversity training alone wouldn't fix the deeper issues within the bank. It wasn't enough to give employees a workshop on racial sensitivity if the bank's leadership wasn't committed to real, lasting change. Angela didn't want words. She wanted action. Behind the scenes, Angela's legal team was already preparing to take the next step. They were working on a lawsuit that would not only hold the bank accountable for what had happened to her, but also demand systemic changes to the way they did business. This was about more than just one bad experience. It was about making sure that no one else had to go through the same thing. But even as the legal battle loomed, Angela felt a sense of victory. The bank had underestimated her. They thought they could apologize and move on, but they hadn't counted on the fact that Angela wasn't backing down. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been treated unfairly, for everyone who had been made to feel less than they were because of their race. And she wasn't going to stop until she saw real change. Angela knew she couldn't just let the bank's weak apology and promises of diversity training be the end of this fight. She had sparked a movement, and now she had to make sure it continued to grow. The media coverage was still strong, and more people were joining her cause every day. She had already started to see the impact she was having on the public conversation, but Angela wanted more than just headlines. She wanted real change. As she sat down with her legal team, they began to outline the next steps. Angela's lawyer had already started preparing a lawsuit against the bank for discrimination, both for the way they had treated her personally and for the larger pattern of mistreatment against black clients and minority-owned businesses. It was a bold move, but Angela wasn't intimidated. She had a strong case, and she knew that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, ignored, or mistreated because of their race. The lawsuit was important, but Angela also knew that taking the bank to court wouldn't fix everything. She needed to push for systemic change, change that would make sure no one else would have to go through what she had experienced. She began reaching out to lawmakers, hoping to get support for new regulations that would hold financial institutions accountable for their treatment of minority clients. Angela wanted to see laws put in place that would force banks to be more transparent in their dealings with customers, to provide better protections for businesses owned by people of color, and to ensure fair lending practices across the board. Angela's message was clear. This was about equality and fairness. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She was asking for the same respect and opportunities that any wealthy business owner should receive. But she also knew that breaking down centuries of racial inequality would take more than just a lawsuit. It would take a cultural shift. And that shift had to start with the financial industry. In addition to the legal battle and her push for legislative change, Angela also decided to take her message directly to the business community. She organized a series of meetings and panel discussions about racial equality and inclusion in business, inviting successful Black entrepreneurs, civil rights leaders, and financial experts to speak. She wanted to make sure that other people who had faced similar challenges would have a platform to share their stories. The more voices she could amplify, the more power her cause would have. The meetings quickly became a space for honest conversations about the deep-rooted racial biases in the business world. People spoke openly about their experiences of being treated unfairly by banks, investors, and clients, and they shared ideas about how to address these issues head-on. It was clear to Angela that there was a real desire for change in the business community, and she knew she could help lead the way. As the legal proceedings continued, the bank became more desperate. They knew Angela wasn't going to back down, and their public image was taking a hit every day. The pressure was mounting, but Angela was ready for whatever came next. She had already built a strong coalition of supporters, and she was prepared to fight for as long as it took. For Angela, this was more than just a battle against one bank. It was about creating a more just and fair business world for everyone. But even as she prepared for the next steps in her campaign, Angela felt a sense of pride. She had started something that could lead to lasting change, and no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. As the legal battle continued to gain momentum, Angela found herself in the midst of a full-blown movement. People from all over the country were rallying behind her cause. The hashtag #BoycottTheBank hashtag had spread far beyond social media, turning into a powerful symbol of the fight for racial equality in business. More and more stories came to light, with individuals sharing their own experiences of being discriminated against by banks and other institutions. It was no longer just about Angela. It was about a larger systemic issue that needed to be addressed. The pressure on the bank was reaching a breaking point. Angela's lawsuit had opened a floodgate of complaints from other Black entrepreneurs, and soon the bank found itself facing multiple legal actions. This wasn't just one case of bad customer service. It was a pattern of discriminatory practices that had been allowed to continue for far too long. The media was now reporting on it constantly, and public opinion had turned against the bank. In an effort to salvage their reputation, the bank began to make more dramatic changes. They fired Harold Thompson, the manager who had refused Angela's service, and promised to review all their hiring and training practices. They also announced plans to create a diversity and inclusion task force to ensure that such discrimination would not happen again. But Angela knew this wasn't enough. She had seen enough corporate apologies in her time to know that real change required more than just empty promises. She needed to see tangible actions, and she wasn't ready to let up until she did. While the bank's actions were an important first step, Angela knew the battle wasn't over. Her legal team was working hard to ensure the lawsuit would go forward, but Angela wanted to make sure that this case would set a precedent. She wanted other banks, other institutions, to understand that they couldn't get away with mistreating minority clients. This was a chance to change the rules of the game, and Angela wasn't going to stop until the financial industry as a whole started to take real responsibility for its actions. Angela continued to speak out, appearing at events, writing op-eds, and using her platform to educate others about the importance of fair and equal treatment in business. She shared her story widely, not just as a way to gain attention, but to make people understand the kind of challenges Black entrepreneurs often face. She wanted her experience to serve as a wake-up call for the business world, a reminder that prejudice and discrimination are still alive, but that they can be fought, and they can be overcome. Her efforts paid off when the bank finally agreed to settle the lawsuit. The terms included not just a financial settlement for Angela, but also a commitment from the bank to overhaul its policies and practices related to minority clients. The bank agreed to work with a third-party organization to create new diversity initiatives, including better training for employees, fairer lending practices, and a commitment to hire more employees from diverse backgrounds. It was a victory, but Angela knew it was just one step in a much longer journey. As she looked back on everything she had achieved, Angela felt a deep sense of pride. She had faced discrimination head-on, not just for herself but for so many others. She had turned her personal experience into a movement that was changing the business world. Angela had made a difference, and that difference would continue to ripple out, inspiring future generations of entrepreneurs to stand up for their rights and fight for a fairer world. Angela knew that the fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges ahead, but she was no longer just a woman fighting for herself. She had become a symbol of resilience and strength for countless others who had faced the same struggles. And as she continued to push for change, she knew that together, people could make a world where fairness and equality were the rule, not the exception.